As an official Porsche track experience instructor, I'm here to teach you what other people pay thousands of dollars for. Are you an aspiring sim racer, a track day enthusiast, or simply interested in cars? Keep watching. As a racing driver, instructor, and former GT Academy finalist, I've been fortunate enough to drive some of the most beautiful cars on the planet, ranging from the newest sports cars to race cars such as single-seaters, GT cars, and occasionally something a bit odd. Whatever your motivation is, Maxed Out's Race Like a Pro series is here to take your racing skills to the next level. Oversteering. So the last video was on understeering, which, as you remember, was the car not turning as much as you wanted to. Oversteering is obviously the exact opposite. So instead of turning as much as you wanted to, the car oversteers, the rear turns more than it wants to. It's kind of like the feeling of the rear of the car trying to overtake you. So you either go into a drift, if you're good enough to hold that drift, or what usually happens is you go into a spin, which is of course dangerous and completely ruins your race or your single lap time. So we want to talk about the two reasons why oversteering can happen, and it is more than just kicking the accelerator down and actually stepping the back end out. There's more to that, and then we'll get straight to what you can do. We're going to talk about 3 tips what you can do to avoid oversteering, and more importantly, if you are in an oversteering situation, how you can still catch the car and keep driving without spinning it. Alright, let's get straight to it. What can cause your car to oversteer? And there are 2 types of reasons, and let's just look at them in sim racing and Gran Turismo in this case, what happens and how we can avoid that. Let's check this out. We're going down here into that tight right-hander, braking it quite nicely, and then just absolutely flooring it, instantly spinning the wheels, and the car just goes straight into a spin. First reason, the classic, the one most of you will have heard of, accelerating too aggressively. So what happens in the video, you can see it, you just absolutely floor it. The car accelerates too much, and we can see again, we're looking at our friction circles. So same as before in the other videos, the big circles showing how much grip we have available, and the red arrows representing the forces we're applying through the car. So in this case, we're doing a right turn, so the car is leaning over to the left, as represented by the left arrows, and we're accelerating it. The turning itself is totally fine, we're not turning it that much, but look at the red arrow pointing downward. The car is trying to sit on its back. We're accelerating quite aggressively, but the red arrows just go beyond the available grip, and the car starts spinning immediately. Traction is lost. First pro tip, what can you do in that situation? Pretty simple, right? The cause of the oversteer is that you're accelerating too much, so naturally you want to decrease your throttle input. So that's nicely shown in the diagram here. What are we doing? We're actually reducing the length of the red arrow, so we're coming off the throttle for a moment. And what do? We counter steer. So think about it, we're doing a right turn, and suddenly the car turns too much over to the right. What do we want it to do? We want it to point where we want it to go. So we want to turn a bit to the left, that's represented by the arrow to the right. So by turning to the left, we put a bit of weight on that wheel that was initially spinning, and just settle it down nicely, and that combined with the reduced throttle input, makes sure that the rear settles again, car stabilizes, and you're able to accelerate out of that corner in a straight line as a result. Watch this, car wants to go into a spin, accelerate and just back off the throttle a little bit, chuck the wheel to the left a little bit, that bit of counter steer, and everything's fine. And let's get straight to the second reason, why are we oversteering? So approaching a fast left-hander, and watch what happens. Getting on the brakes and turning in as we get on the brakes, and what happens? The rear steps out, we oversteer and slide straight into the gravel. Second reason why a car can oversteer is turning in with a light rear. So by light rear, I mean not the absolute weight that's in the car on the rear, but what would you do to the car that shifts the weight of the car to the front, thereby making it really light and twitchy. So let's look at the diagram here. What you can really see is we're going into that left-hander, right? So the car is leaning over onto the right. Right friction circles are a bit bigger, a bit more grip available, but really what the car is also doing, leaning on the front wheel, right? So you can see this massive available grip on the front right tire, but what happens is we're turning in and we're braking, right? As you can see, the red arrows are within the bounds of the friction circle and the front wheels, all good, we're not going to understeer, but what you can see is if you connect them, actually the red dots are outside on the rear because you're shifting the weight of the car to the front by such an extreme amount that the car on the weight on the rear is just not there anymore to hold it. And that's going to be a problem because obviously that weight of the car is then going to pull itself around, it wants to start sliding, and that's when you start oversteering, as you could see in the video. So what do we do in that type of situation? Because we can't just come off the throttle like in the first scenario, right? So we got to think of something else. So the problem initially, think back about that, was that too much of the weight is on the front and the rear of the car is really light. So naturally, if the braking combined with turning in causes that weight transfer, we want to get back to a stable position. So number one thing you have to do is just come off the brakes. The rear will start to settle and get that additional bit of grip. If you're already going into too much of a spin, as you could see in the video, just counter steer that little bit. Same thing, you transfer the load of the car to the other side, so that inner side that was sliding initially gets that bit of grip. Car starts to settle, don't do too aggressively. And as you can do that, as you can see in the video, it's not going to get you the perfect lap time, but at least you're not going to spin the car.
Let's apply that in practice. So approaching the same fast left-hander, braking, rear steps out and instantly I come off the brakes. Just a bit of counter steering and everything's safe. Let's see that again. Coming left-hander, pretty similar corner again, braking, turning in. Car wants to oversteer, come off the brakes, bit of a counter steering motion, and everything's alright.
There is one final pro tip that is really unknown that I want to tell you guys to avoid oversteering or to catch the car. And that is even applying a little bit of throttle. So we talked about reason one why oversteering can happen is applying too much throttle, right? But what happens if we talk about the second scenario, unloading the rear of the car, the rear gets really light and because of that starts stepping out. We talked about coming off the brakes and counter steering. The thing is sometimes that kind of oversteering might happen simply by coming off the throttle, right? That equally shifts the weight to the front and the car might start going into a spin. So coming off the brakes isn't an option. You're already starting to go into a spin. Of course you want to counter steer, really, right? You want to re-straighten the car, make it point in the right direction where you want to go, but combine that with just a little bit of throttle input. We don't want to start spinning the wheels, we don't want to accelerate. All we want to use that throttle input for is to have the rear of the car sit down again, get that extra little bit on the rear axle as shown by the bigger friction circles here. Combine that, look at that compared to the coming off the brake scenario, and look, we don't just re-stabilize, we don't just get the car into neutral position, we have even more grip on the rear axle. Just for that short moment, it really lets the car sit down, get that back where you need it, get that grip back where you need it on the rear axle, right? This is what we want when we're oversteering, and that way you can actually save a lot of lap time. Not just are you avoiding a spin, but you're neutralizing the oversteer much faster, and therefore you can start accelerating again, and so on.
Let's have a look at that in practice. We're really going to force the oversteer here, so braking deep into the corner and look in slow motion. As the rear wants to go, counter steer just a little bit of throttle and it straightens up straight away. The rear really settles nicely and it really didn't cost you any time.
And there you go. You now know the two reasons why oversteering can happen, either accelerating too aggressively or unloading the rear, thereby causing it to go into a spin. And you know what to do. If you start oversteering because you're accelerating too aggressively, just back off the throttle, counter steer. If you're going into a corner too fast and combine that with braking and turning, thereby unloading the rear, simply come off the brakes, counter steer. Think about the third pro tip, just a little bit of throttle can actually do wonders for you. So I hope you guys liked that video. Subscribe if you want to see more like this, and I'll see you guys in the next video.